Hi, and welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Today on the show, we have Sarah Shu. She is a medical student and she co-wrote the Kevin MD article, Five Things Medical Professionals Can Do to Take Climate Action. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll get into your article in a little bit, but first off, can you share your story and your journey to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm originally from Los Angeles and I did my undergraduate degree at Brown University. I studied sociology there and then I matriculated to Brown as a medical student and also as a master's student in the primary care population medicine program. I've always had an interest in environmental studies and when I matriculated at Brown, I realized there really wasn't a community for that here. And so I, along with Natasha, my co-writer for this article, founded, or one of the founders for Medical Students for a Sustainable Future. We also co-host a new podcast called Code Green, the Climate Smart Health Professional, with the goal of educating healthcare professionals about climate and health.
Wonderful. And you and Natasha co-wrote this Kevin MD article, Five Things Medical Professionals Can Do to Take Climate Action. But before you get into the article, talk a little about that intersection between medicine and climate change.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a question that we get all the time. People know about climate change, but they really don't know about some of the impacts climate change has on human health. And I think the best way to summarize it is that it really intersects with everything from dermatology, cardiology, pulmonology. I think one of my favorite examples is that, for example, because of climate change in Rhode Island, we are the fastest warming state in the continental US. And because of that, we are expected to have 4 times more heat waves in 2050 than we are having now. And this has impact on especially like vulnerable patients, like elderly patients, pediatric patients. We know that on hotter days in places that are next to the freeway or next to toxic facilities, children are more likely to have asthma attacks, for example. So these are just some of the things that we're thinking about when we're thinking about how climate change might be impacting human health.
And during your first few years of medical education, has there been any formal inclusion of climate change in some of the courses that you've been taking?
Very little, but we're actively working to change that. So at Brown University, I co-lead the Planetary Health Task Force, which has the goal of integrating a 4-year longitudinal curriculum on climate change, environmental degradation, and how that impacts health disparities. At universities and medical schools across the US, we have I think close to 20 medical schools that have participated in the Planetary Health Report Card, which is a student-led metric-based report card to measure how our medical schools are addressing planetary health in our curriculum. So these changes are actively underway.
Excellent. So now let's get into the article that you co-wrote, and it's titled Five Things Medical Professionals Can Do to Take Climate Action. Now, for those who didn't read that article, can you just walk my audience through it and share the story why you and Natasha decided to write it?
Yeah, absolutely. So we published this right before the 2020 election. And at that time, Natasha and I were having hundreds of talks with students, residents, physicians about how to get tapped into climate work. I think people can feel very nervous and scared about how big of a problem the climate crisis is. And we wanted to make sure people had tangible tips and tricks ready to take action. And so we just compiled a lot of the resources that we were giving everyone into an easily accessible article. And so among some of the things at that time was the first of which was helping elect climate champions into office. So we need leaders in policy who will be passing like climate smart policies. And so we listed some of the local and national resources to get involved with that. I think the second pointer we had was just to join a physician or medical student advocacy group. Taking collective action is one of the best ways to get involved and to tap into existing work. And I think the third thing that we had mentioned was working on greening your department or your hospital clinic. As healthcare professionals, we are sworn in to first do no harm. And so it's ironic that the US healthcare system contributes nearly 8 to 9% of annual greenhouse gas emissions. We are part of the problem and we contribute to the adverse health outcomes of our patients. And so we need to take action to green our healthcare system as well. And the last two things that we had talked about was one, just like start learning about climate change and health. We listed a couple ways to get CME credit for this, as well as just like free videos that you can access online. Something that didn't make it into this article was our new podcast, which is called Code Green, the Climate Smart Health Professional. So that's another free way that you can get climate and health education on the go. And then the last thing was that if you are an expert or you have some expertise in this area, we encourage people to educate their peers. So host grand rounds, teach medical students or teach your peers about this, because the more people we have working on this, the faster we can mobilize our community.
Well, those are all wonderful tips. I think that to no one's surprise, as medical students and doctors, time is very, very limited. So I guess the question, as all medical students ask, is in terms of highest yield actionable tips. So I guess if you were to give highest yield actionable tips to both medical students and practicing clinicians, what would some of those specific tips be?
The first thing I would say is you don't have to do this alone. I think as a first-year medical student, I felt so lost and overwhelmed. I knew I wanted to do something climate and health, but I had no idea where to start. How do I do research? How do I engage in advocacy? How do I integrate climate and health into med ed? I cannot do that alone. But there are hundreds of physicians and medical students out there working on a variety of different projects. So I would say start with a community and just pick one project and run with it. So you don't have to do everything at once.
Excellent. And then you did mention some communities, but off the top of your head, what are some specific ones that you recommend?
Yeah, so for medical students, we have Medical Students for a Sustainable Future. So we are a group of 400 medical students across over 83 medical schools now who work on a variety of projects, including curriculum, advocacy, and research. And then on the physician side, there's the Physicians Network. So Healthcare Without Harm has a physicians network that gathers by region and also by specialty. And so going on the Healthcare Without Harm website would be the best way to start.
We're talking to Sarah Shu. She is a medical student and she co-wrote the Kevin MD article, 5 Things Medical Professionals Can Do to Take Climate Action. Sarah, you did mention some resources at the end of your article, but if we are interested in learning more about that intersection between climate change and medicine, what are some resources off the top of your head that's the most useful?
Yeah, absolutely. So for free ones, I would definitely go to Emory School of Medicine. They have a free archive of lectures online given by leading physician climate advocates across the country. And I'll also repeat again that our podcast is really pushing for short 10 to 15 minute episodes that you can listen on your drive to work that'll tackle different aspects of climate change and health. And again, it's called Code Green, the Climate Smart Health Professional.
And you mentioned that you're trying to get a concurrent curriculum involving climate change in medical education. So I guess what's the response of some of your professors and I guess the school itself in terms of incorporating some of these changes into their curriculum?
It's really interesting. I think, as we're having this conversation, it's a very new topic. And I think as more and more of our faculty learn about the impacts of climate change has on human health, they have been very, very receptive. About, I think 2 weeks ago, I just presented the Planetary Health Task Force to all the clerkship directors at Brown University, and they were very interested and very engaged and had a lot of questions about what other institutions are doing and what the best practices are. So I think change is happening across medical schools, and I think places that we can look to for, examples would be University of San Francisco, Stanford University, and Emory University School of Medicine are all doing incredible work in this area.
And my final question, what's your take-home message that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
Yeah, so I would just say find a community and just pick one thing to get started, whether it's med ed, sustainability research, supporting local environmental justice groups just by donating money, or just committing to learning like one thing about climate change and health. These are all steps in the right direction.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. And thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.